this morning. Right, joining us this morning, Alexandra Ward, political commentator, and with her, Noah Khogali, Conservative Councillor for Strathern. Good morning to the two of you.
Morning.
Lovely to see you. First time here.
Thank you for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. We love to have new talent, so thank you very much for coming. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's lovely to be back.
Well, it's lovely that you're in London.
It is. I wish the weather was nicer. I was here for the rugby yesterday.
Right.
And it wasn't raining, which is good, but then I woke up this morning, it was just absolutely drenched.
So Isabel Lang, famous weather presenter, tells me it's going to get hot.
When?
May 7th.
May 7th specifically.
As my mum said to me yesterday, in before 7, out by 11. Rain.
Right. Well, that's helpful. What's that mean? What's that mean?
So if it starts before 7, it finishes by 11.
Well, it isn't going to.
Well, how do you know you're not
Your
11
mum's wrong.
yet?
Your mum's wrong.
Rain's
Right.
She'll be after you.
Yeah, your mother is quite formidable. Good morning. Good morning, Mum. Right, let's start if we can. Dan Poulter. I find this absolutely extraordinary. I was saying just now, he is my constituency MP. I've known him a long time. He used to deliver leaflets for me, actually, back in the day when I was standing in Brighton. His mother was my agent. He is a Conservative Member of Parliament. He has a massive majority. I do not understand what is going on here, because if he has a real beef, surely he resigns. People elected him as a Conservative. My constituency is very Conservative in its outlook, not necessarily in how they vote, but in its outlook. And I don't understand what is going on here. And maybe René's right. What do you think's going on? Did the Labour Party bribe him? Are they giving him something like a seat in the upper house? What do you think?
I think that this speaks to the heart of politics, actually. I'm not sure that it's really a bribe. More so, he personally has had a shift in his ideology. He's realised in his day-to-day job as a doctor, what he stands for has shifted away from what he was elected to stand for, what his party stands for now, and I think that just reflects a shift in his ideology. And maybe his political career isn't over in his mind, so he wants to move somewhere where he feels more represented by and more loyal to now.
That's really interesting. He is part-time in the NHS. He knows very well, we all know as doctors, what the struggles are in the NHS. I don't buy that answer, actually.
Well,
it's a good answer.
I am going to answer that because I really want to. I don't think he has had a shift in his policies, because I just did a little bit of research.
Oh, yes.
And back in as far as 2012 and 2016, he actually wrote for the Morning Star.
Right.
And he wrote about the funding crisis in the NHS, that junior doctors, the government was wrong to sell them down the river. He actually, as I did, left the BMA at the last junior doctor strike because he felt the junior doctors had been very badly handled. But you know what?
Hang on a minute, he left the BMA?
He did. I don't know if he's rejoined, but that was back in 2016 when I left.
In protest?
At the way that the junior doctors had been handled.
Or had handled themselves?
No, the BMA had handled.
Right,
Remember
yeah,
the
no, I
negotiations?
understand. So basically what he's saying is he didn't like the way the junior doctors were behaving because they were being...
And he criticised his own government and went against the government line then, and he then wrote for the Morning Star. The Morning Star is not a newspaper that a Tory MP would normally be seen dead writing in.
Okay.
It's a very left-wing Marxist kind of title.
So Noah, obviously I'm going to put you on the spot here, because this is your party. This is your party. You're sailing into electoral oblivion, possibly. This is yet another one that's resigning. We're now at 66. By the way, that is not the record. The record is 97.
When was that?
97.
Sorry, is it 97?
It was in 1997 and it was 75.
Correct, it was 75. So they're not far off. They're not far off. So a few more to go and then we're almost there. Now, Dan Poulter, they're not exactly thrilled in Suffolk, let me tell you. My neighbour wrote to me, she sent me the letter he'd sent. I can tell you, based on my WhatsApp messages last night, they are not happy in the slightest. And Sam Murray, a Suffolk County councillor, posted, "Good riddance. I'm so glad I no longer have to apologise for his failure to turn up in North Ipswich." What do you make of this?
It's a bit weird, and I share your cynicism as to the reasons why this has happened, and I really wouldn't be surprised to see a lordship on the cards. It is always odd when a Tory MP, who will know very well that the Tories since 2010 have injected another 50 billion into the NHS, is turning around and pretending that never happened. That screams of someone whose principles are very shaky. And obviously, I didn't realise about the Morning Star stuff, but this does now seem like someone who is just going to kind of blow with the wind a little bit, and you know, in 10, 20 years might be defecting back the other way.
Or has been in the wrong party. If he's been writing for those kind of titles for such a long time,
but also,
maybe
what does
it
it say? But there's a bigger issue here, because what does it say to all of the people who campaign so hard? And I know these people. They campaign so hard. They knock on doors. They put the leaflets through the letterbox. He's campaigning. He campaigned as a Conservative. I think he has a duty to be Conservative. And I think that's where the breakdown in politics comes from.
I think it's very telling that this has come just before the May re-election. I think in himself he probably wouldn't be able to re-stand as a Conservative MP because, as we're saying, his allegiances have shifted, and I think in good faith he wanted to fulfil his tenure and then say, this is a new chapter for me.
But why not fulfil his tenure to the election?
Exactly.
Well, it's only in
We just
next
stand
week.
down.
Well, no, the election isn't next week. Those are local elections.
Yeah, so the election, we don't know. It could be January. That's the latest the general election could be. So surely he owes it to his constituents to say, OK, I'll sit as an independent, maybe, until the end.
I don't think he wants to sit in it as an independent, though. I think he's saying that my allegiance is now with the Labour Party. He's taken his own opinion on the cost of living crisis.
I think you're right. So why not stand down and have a by-election?
Because this is strategically timed by the Labour Party. We're a week away from elections. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to always be overly cynical, but this is pure electioneering. That's what it is.
Well, and so I started thinking about this because there's been boundary changes, and so it takes in North Ipswich. That tends to be more Labour voting than, say, rural Suffolk, which tends to be more Conservative. So that would make a bit more sense if you align yourself with Labour, but he's standing down. So again, it doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. But the ramification of this is quite significant because Rishi Sunak is going to face Thursday. And of course, we've got the locals, we've got Blackpool South, we've got the London mayoral election. And I think pretty much everyone thinks it's going to be, well, not great. Shall we say, not great. And so Conservative rebels now working on a 100-day roadmap to turn around the party's fortunes. Essentially, this is based on Newt Gingrich. What they want is a series of quick wins, and they are going to coalesce, and I'm pretty sure about this, the letters are going in. Now, when you do the maths, and this is the kind of nerdy thing I like to do, is to work out how many, if you need 15%, actually the number of MPs' letters that you need has now dropped again. So do you think Rishi Sunak is about to be ousted?
I'm not sure if he's about to be ousted, but I know that he will try and stay on until at least the first Rwanda plane has been shipped off. Because if there is a vote of no confidence prior to that, if he steps down, if he calls for another election prior to that, he runs the risk of that plane not ever flying. And given this has been something that they've been fighting for almost a year now.
2 years.
2 years, my goodness. That would just be cherry on top of the cake.
But if it's not really in his heart, would it suit him to go to the elections before that first plane in order to say, I have fought for 2 years for this, and if you get rid of me now, Labour will stop it?
I think somebody who's poured 1.8 billion into a policy can hardly be constituted as not being into it.
Well, so as Chancellor, he wasn't keen. He thought it was a terrible policy. I think he kept going because he knew that he had to. Just in terms of that, and there are so many parts to this, actually, just in terms of Sunak, the no confidence votes. Let me just ask you, though, if you were advising the Conservative Party, and thank goodness you're not, because that would be a very tricky thing to do, would you say, look, you know, it's looking pretty awful, so let's go all out, final spin of the wheel, we're going to bet everything on black, we're going to go and have another leader?
I think it depends what kind of Conservative I would be. I think if I was on the Rwanda side, on the let's get rid of all of these immigrants, then no, actually, because I think any sort of instability to do with leadership, even if I personally thought it would be better in the long term, I think their main priority is to get that through and then deal with the fallout, then call an election whenever that will be and get whoever they want in.
So you're a Conservative councillor, and you must get the flack from what's going on.
Oh, we have done for years. That's kind of the role of councillors. We're the first line of that conversation, and that's fine. And
do people say to you, "Why aren't you Conservative as a government?" Not you.
I mean, that's the question. Again, I'm a political nerd. That's the kind of conversation I have all the time with people from all walks of life. Ultimately, Rishi Sunak will lead the Conservative Party into this next election. I'm 100% sure of that. And we've been, look, I think the reason that there's doubt is that over the past few years, we've kind of, and probably since before COVID really, we've kind of got caught up with this house of cards and what's the most exciting thing that could happen. But I think we've got to be realistic. He's going to be the leader.
Really interesting. Let me just bring some of our viewers in on their comments. Ernest, good morning to you. Hi, David. Is your guest having a laugh? Alexandra, this is you. Changing ideology? Are you familiar with the phrase rats deserting a sinking ship? That's what they're doing. How would you like to respond to that?
I would hardly say a doctor who's on the front lines seeing the toll on the NHS.
But he's always been a doctor on the front line.
I'm a doctor on the front line, seeing the toll on the NHS every day.
Well, he's having a reaction to it, and I think you are well within
timed.
You're well within your rights to.
Let her finish.
You're well within your rights to reflect inwardly and change outlook. And
so
I think
you've bought this story.
I have.
Have you?
I have.
Why?
I'm an optimist.
Right.
I believe in democracy, and I believe that in any democracy we shouldn't be so allied to parties and political ideology.
Even though we voted him there as a party, that's what people voted for. They voted for the Conservative Manifesto. That's democracy.
Well, they can vote somebody else in.
Yeah,
he can.
You're right.
He can vote. He can be in another party. I don't.
Well,
see the issue.
why don't they vote someone else in then? Why don't we have a by-election?
So what? Yeah, it's a great point.
There could be a by-election.
So you're right. So all of these are options, and obviously there is, I think, and I'm a cynic, but I think there's a much bigger story behind this, and no one can give me an answer as to what that story is, but I have my own suspicions. Let's just look at the Conservative Party, because also then letters of no confidence are going in. I'm not sure you're right. I'm really not sure you're right. Because let's say you get a drumming in the local elections and in the mayoral, let's ignore that because that won't happen. But in the local elections, I think they're so disillusioned. And friends of mine who are Conservative members of Parliament sitting on low majorities are thinking, well, I'm going to lose my job. And they're coalescing. We've even got the One Nation lot round Penny Mordaunt now. So you've got all of these groups saying, well, Penny Mordaunt may well be the right person to lead us forward. Now, also, just hear me out here. What happens if they coalesce round Penny Mordaunt, they actually decide to be Conservative, which actually I don't think either party is. They are mirror images of themselves at the moment. High tax, high regulation, low growth parties. That's not profoundly Conservative, is it? Can they get themselves out of this mess?
Yes, absolutely. It is just about a journey. There is no quick fixes at this point. You can't quick fix what some people are angry about being, almost a decade and a half.
A short journey?
It could be January next year, look.
It's game over, isn't it?
It's not. It's never game over.
Yeah, good.
It's never game over. But ultimately, but you can't just look for these very quick reactionary fixes where you can't change leader again. The public simply will not accept that.
Okay, taking what you say, it's fixable. What needs to happen between now and whenever to fix it?
So the flights need to go to Rwanda, and those pledges need to be fulfilled. There is wiggle room in terms of the NHS. And the waiting list pledge because of the strikes. But in terms of the Rwanda one, the government really needs to drive that home now because they promised it to the public.
I think it's enough.
Do I think it's enough? Well, that's up to the public to decide, but it's what was promised. And all of our politicians, fundamentally, they need to fulfil their promises.
Alexandra?
I think that if the Rwanda bill goes through and those flights take off, that will be the end.
The end of what?
The end of the Conservative run for the last 14 years in this country.
If the flights take off?
If they take off. Why do you say that?
I think normal people are seeing the sheer amount of funds, resources that have suddenly appeared to be opened up. I'm aware that these are immigration courts, immigration lawyers who've not been dealing with as much backlog as other areas of the justice system. But for your ordinary person, they're suddenly seeing all of this money, all of these courts, all of these judicial systems being freed up.
You see, I think ordinary people are sick and tired of this country being abused.
But I think they'd much rather have shorter NHS waiting list times.
But we spend so much money, and actually this is a tiny amount of money when you compare it to the overall NHS budget.
They also
so at the moment we spent 300 million, right, on the Rwanda scheme. So you're right about the bigger figure, but actually I think what people want is to take back, dare I say, control of the borders of this country, don't they?
I think people are more concerned about their day-to-day existence, about if there's been a crime committed against them, a sex crime, a racial crime.
I agree that those things are very important, but I also think, I was just going to say, that people are linking immigration with long waiting list times, with not being able to get a dentist, with the crime in their area, and with them not feeling safe on the streets as a woman anymore.
And I think we need to separate these two narratives.
Do we?
There's
I think they're linked.
A very dangerous underlying and racialised narrative that links these two together. It is not true that immigrants commit the most crimes, sex crimes, illegal immigrants.
How do you know that?
You can look it up in any criminal statistics.
No, the government have not been collecting that data. They've only just said they will. This is not true.
I believe that there were figures in the last 10 years that would...
In countries like Sweden, it is true.
I'm going to pause at this point and let us regroup. I have to go to a break. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. But Tom is not loving it because I've got to go to a break. Will you two stop it? We'll have a quick break. We'll come back with these guys after this break. This is TalkTV. Back to Weekend Breakfast 8:48. We're in the... they're still chatting, you know, all the way through. All the way... What? It's good. Yes, no, it's good, it's good, it's good. Alexandra Ward and Noah Khogali are here with us for the Future Politics panel, and the wife's here as well. This is really interesting, though. This is Leah Nisi. I think I've pronounced that correctly. She's the first Conservative MP for Great Grimsby in almost 100 years. She basically was elected in 2019. She's a Red Wall Tory MP, and she says, Noah, that Reform UK has lots of ideas people are like, and admitted she doesn't think Rishi Sunak is a charismatic leader. And she went further to say, I'm more reform than most Reform candidates, in a live panel event in her constituency on Thursday. I find that extraordinary.
Yeah, really weird quotes, I think, actually. And just on the Rishi Sunak point, I don't know whether you saw earlier in the week his video with Hardest Geezer, the bloke that ran the entire length of Africa, and that was the first time in a while that I've really seen the charisma come out, and you could really see that was a man trying to do the right thing.
I would agree, and actually I thought it was great. It was natural. Yeah. He was just having a nice time, really. What do you make of this? So here we are, Leah Nisi, if that is correct, in 2019 in Great Grimsby, Red Wall, so obviously under threat at the next election, now aligning herself with Reform, saying, I'm more Reform than Reform, and she then praises Lee Anderson, who has defected to Reform.
I think she's trying to insure herself against voters who don't want to vote for Labour, are unsure about the Conservatives, and then would naturally look to Reform.
So why doesn't she defect?
Well, I don't think she wants to defect. I think she's just trying to appease that voter base. She's saying, well, why would you go for them? Go for me. I'm just as good, if not better.
Right.
And then, because of our two-past-the-post system...
Well, the brilliant bit about this, Richard Tice told The Telegraph, Leah is quite right, our reform policies are very popular, and it sounds like she should give me a ring. And Lee has my number. So I thought that was rather a brilliant quote from Richard, actually. But just in terms of that, doesn't it show how desperate they've all become, which is they're saying, actually, I'm your constituency MP, I'm not a party politician.
They're trying to distance themselves from the very centrist debate in politics. They're trying to appeal to the more right-wing voter base, the voter base that feels maybe let down or ignored, and they're trying to carve out some form of niche, maybe some headlines, just to...
I wonder if it shows that this electoral poll that we see for Labour is actually very soft indeed.
I keep saying it's
soft. And
that
there is so much flux out there that these politicians, by saying these kind of things, are showing us how unsettled it feels.
So also, let me just tell you about the YouGov poll. Earlier this week showed more than a quarter of people who voted for Brexit in 2016 now plan to support Richard Tice's party, putting it 5 points behind the Tories amongst Leave voters. And also, this is a bigger challenge for Sunak because 74% of Brexiteers used to back about the Conservative Party, and they may well not do that, and you're right. So is this actually about saying, I'm not sure, and I keep saying, as you know, I keep saying this lead is soft, and this is why I think it's interesting. There's some quite interesting political manoeuvring this morning going on. Robert Jenrick calling for a cap on net migration to less than 100,000 a year. That is actually, he actually then talks about reducing those numbers. Well, I think you'll find a reform policy is to stop the numbers entirely, one in, one out, let's just say, and that is a factual statement. But isn't it interesting that he's now talking about migration, goes back to the issue I have said, which is this election is pretty much underpinned by migration.
Was this not a Tory policy, though? Was it not in a manifesto?
Yes,
they had a cap on it.
They said that, yes, it was
so
Cameron.
down to tens of thousands was the Cameron policy.
And where is it now? 745,000. So you're out by a margin of what? 700%.
Yeah, and I think part of what the challenge is that we're exploring here is that the Tory party has always been a very broad church, but now for the first time, part of that church has kind of moved out. And that's the problem that lots of these MPs are facing, is they are now questioning whether they stay part of the broad church that has and will always be the Tory party, or do they splinter, essentially? And that sounds like what she's verbalising there.
Will they splinter?
Maybe some will, but I think the majority of Conservatives do see the value in having such a broad church party, that we have people like the TRG and the One Nation Conservatives able to sit down and work out policies together.
I think it's what's caused our problems. I think the Conservatives with an 80-seat majority have been paralysed by fear because of all of these factions in their party.
But it leads to moderation, I'd argue, and that
leads to nothing.
Or inaction.
Leads to nothing, yeah.
And that's the risk, and that requires strong leadership.
There are at least 5, if not 6 groups under there, as you mentioned, the ERG, New Conservatives, One Nation, all of these groups sitting under that. It is fascinating that and Jenrick has spoken about this before, but immigration, I keep saying, as we come to this election, people can't see a doctor, they can't get their kids into schools, for example. There's no infrastructure in this country. Everything is falling apart. So Keir Starmer, in terms of his policies, I find this interesting. He is vowing to keep the pensions triple lock, and that is a direct appeal to older voters who would naturally vote Conservative.
Yeah, I think it's the opposite side of the coin we were just discussing. Older voters are more likely to be Conservative. That is historically where Labour's had an issue. So he's trying to appeal to their concerns and say, look, this is not just a young left-wing party, this is for everybody, I care about you, this is what we'll do about it.
What will young people think of that?
Well, everybody's going to get old. I think it's very...
But let's just go back to what you said. And by the way, someone's just said, Sarah in London says, I agree with Alexandra. Where have all these courts and judges and money been found from? They can suddenly find them now. So someone agreeing with you there. But yes, when you're looking at priorities for young people who are going to vote, and that's a brilliant point from Renee, when they're going to vote, are they going to look at the triple lock and think, whoopee-doo? So people who are retired are going to get that increase, which is locked in. Meanwhile, I, as a student, can't afford to eat.
I think one of the biggest detriments in politics nowadays is a very short-term, very insular outlook.
Agreed.
I obviously care about, when I was a student, being able to afford rent, being able to afford student loans, all of that. But I know that other people have to care about me and I have to care about other people.
Sure.
My ageing grandmother, I don't want to think about her being worried about paying bills. I don't want to have to worry about supporting her as well if my wage is being cut, if all of this, all of that. We have to think about society as a whole and a community as a whole.
I agree. Never.
Yeah, we do need to think about it as a whole, and that is why, and this is a conversation I've had with my own grandparents a million times, the triple lock is such an odd concept to me, because whilst the rest of the country can be getting, in real terms, worse off due to inflation, cost of living, whatever it is, pensioners have a guarantee that they will always get better off. Even if it's a small amount. And that's the bit that I struggle with.
And our pension is actually very poor compared to the rest of Europe. We have the lowest pension in our major countries.
It's a really good point there. We're ring fencing, and I actually think it's great that we look after older people, and we need to look after older people, and actually we need to keep older people well so they don't end up in care. So, but equally, that is a very good point, which is actually it's ring fence. Young people don't have that safety net.
I think we need to have a policy targeted towards older people. I'm not personally Keir Starmer's biggest #1 supporter, so I think there is room for debate and discussion about what the best policy is that doesn't, as you say, ring fence younger people, that is proportional. But it is true, we have one of the worst pensions in, not just in Europe, in the world. So I think something has to be done about that.
Can I just ask you about VAT? Because Labour is now thinking about lowering the VAT threshold, which I think is a very odd policy indeed, dragging more small businesses.
Lower the tax threshold.
Lower the tax threshold. Do you support that? I want to move on to one more story before we go.
Don't worry. I believe that we're looking at tax completely wrong. We need to not punish middle-class people. We need to be focusing on the 350 richest families in this country that do not pay enough tax. And across the world, it's more about modest taxes on, I'm talking about billionaires here, about the uber rich, rather than just your average doctor, lawyer.
But isn't there
Can I jump in with a number?
Well, I was just going to say, isn't there also, just bear this in mind, isn't there an issue also, maybe there is a point here, I own a small business, and some small businesses keep themselves below the threshold so they don't become VAT registered. Isn't there actually the argument to make the threshold higher?
Look, I don't think Labour are actually going to lower VAT because they're going to get into government and realise they can spend loads of money if they don't, and that, especially for a Labour Party, is
You
always
think they're
going to
be able to spend loads of money?
Well,
There isn't any.
Yeah, no, I know, but if they start cutting tax, then it's going to be worse for them. The bit that I wanted to pick up really quickly on those richest families, the top 1% of earners in the UK contribute 30% of the tax income. Top 10% is 60%.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a huge amount. How much more do you want to increase that burden?
And also, let me just ask you this very quickly, because time is time. Michael O'Leary, obviously head of Ryanair, he's defended he is about to get a bonus of €100 million. And he says, get off. He says, stop your mewling nonsense about my €100 million pay. He says, I'm like a football manager, like Pep Guardiola or Jurgen Klopp. 100 million, can you reconcile that? Is that okay? He's done very well. He's grown an airline.
I think if it's legal, there's nothing technically wrong with it, but we have to look into why that's legal.
Well, he's made a very successful airline where people go abroad for 12 quid.
Yes, but why is he the one earning
'Cause he's
100
running.
million
He's done it.
He's
and
running.
not? But what about all the other people that work for him, that
Okay.
work with him?
Ryanair clearly think he's worth it, and I'm not going to tell Ryanair how to run their business because they're clearly doing very well.
Very good.
Perhaps he should come and run the government.
Apart from the thing I hate is drip pricing. I absolutely loathe drip pricing. We can talk about that later on. Thank you very much to both of you.